Assalamu alaikum. If the brothers can just come close, the workshop is about to start. For those brothers who aren't aware or who have been benefiting from this workshop these past few weeks and inshallah past few days and then inshallah in the coming days, these classes or classes like this are taught during our summer Arabic intensive. This year it's going to be taught during our Deen intensive, which starts pretty much immediately after Ramadan on June 10th. So for 3 weeks, the students, college students, high school students, even sometimes we have adults, 30 years old, 40 years old, 50 years old, who come and attend these programs, the summer programs. For 3 weeks this year, the students are going to be learning 4 subjects. One is going to be Aqidah, the other is going to be Fiqh, Sirah, and the final one will be spirituality. We're going to have different instructors teaching them, including Mufti Azimuddin and Mufti Minhajuddin, possibly Imlana Yusuf and some other instructors, Dar Islam instructors. So if you're interested, if you benefited from the courses, this course in particular, during Itikaf, I highly recommend that everyone looks into this course. It's just 3 weeks, Monday through Friday. You'll still have your weekends, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. So if you're interested, please join that, and that could give you a taste of our full 1-year program, which is a full year and it's a full immersion in these subjects. The flyers are available outside, and we have information on our website. If anyone is interested, they could see me or one of the other responsible brothers.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وزد علما اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. As we can all see on the board, our topic for discussion today is the concept of bid'ah. And this isn't normally discussed in, I guess, classes of Aqidah or anything like that. But as I mentioned before, I figured that this is a topic that is very misunderstood. Most people don't really know too much about it, and most people apply the label bid'ah very haphazardly. So you have some people that haphazardly apply the label bid'ah. Anything that somebody does, like bid'ah, 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 can't do that. And then for other people, nothing falls under bid'ah, and they basically do anything and everything, and then they say it's all okay. So then the normal Muslim like me and you finds ourselves very confused, because on one side we're being pulled in one way, on another side we're being pulled in another way, and then we're just sort of left to, we're just left in a confused state in the middle. So I figured that it would be pertinent to spend just a few minutes discussing it. This discussion, it's just one small little concept. So it won't take very long. I know I've been going a little bit long in the past few sessions, but this will hopefully not take too long. At least that's what I think right now. I guess we'll see in 45 minutes. It's just one concept. So inshallah, it won't take too long, and hopefully this will provide a little bit of clarity for a concept that's often misunderstood. So before we get into it, let's just see how much we know collectively. Who can tell me what is a bid'ah? What does that word even mean? I didn't even translate it. Yeah. Innovation, what does that mean? Yeah. Innovation? A religious innovation. Okay. That's kind of a big word. Can you please explain for us? Okay. In addition to Islam? Yeah, okay, so innovation basically means something that's introduced, something that's new. In other words, to clarify a little bit, as we just heard, in addition to Islam. That's basically what the bid'ah is. Now, in our religion, in Islam, there's a huge emphasis on we need to abstain from bid'at, we need to abstain from all these innovations, we can't allow any of these innovations to creep into our religion. Now, the question is, why are bid'ahs so bad? Do other religions also have other religious traditions, do they have a similar condemnation of bid'ah, of innovations? Well, I don't know, but let's just try to theorize it in our own religious tradition. In Islam, what is the big deal about bid'ahs? Why are they so bad? Anyone? Without looking at the screen? So that's addition to deen, but the question is, we know that, but why is that bad? So what are you going to slip into? Yeah, in the back? Okay, we'll get into those details inshallah. But just right now, yeah. Okay, you're on the right track. Okay, last answer, yeah. Okay, good. There you go, that's what I was looking for. So the deen is already perfect. That was the last answer. The deen is already perfect. Allah Ta'ala revealed to the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم وأتممت عليكم نعمتي ورضيت لكم الإسلام دينا. During the final Hajj, the Prophet ﷺ was standing there. This is after a period of 23 years of exertion, of hardship, of spreading the deen, learning the deen, teaching the deen. And finally now, when the Prophet ﷺ sees over 100,000 Sahaba before him, he sees the fruits of his efforts. Now this is at the culmination of a 23-year period of exertion. Allah Ta'ala reveals this ayah, that today I perfected the religion. Meaning that if the religion is perfect, in other words, I've completed the religion. The religion is complete, what does that mean? That means that there's nothing else that needs to be added to it. And if something is added to it, if somebody says that, well, we're going to introduce this new aspect to the religion, then inherently, what would that sort of be implying? That would be implying that the Prophet ﷺ didn't do a complete job, right? Because and after that, the Prophet ﷺ asked the people, have I conveyed the message? And they said, لقد أبلغت الرسالة وأديت الأمانة ونصحت الأمة وكشفت الغمة. That indeed you have conveyed your message. You've done everything that was entrusted upon you. So if we say that, well, actually, let's add something more to make it even better. In doing that, we are actually implying that there was some deficiency to begin with. The Prophet ﷺ didn't fully do his job, and there's something else that we need to add to it. So now with that in mind, we kind of see why bid'ahs are a bad idea, because there's an inherent implication in it that it was incomplete before, now we need to do something to add to it, to make it better, to make it more complete. Do we understand? So that's sort of the idea behind bid'ahs. And then, as I wrote on the board over here, there's no prophet to come after the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In other religious traditions, even if the religion got messed up after the Prophet passed away, it wouldn't really be such a big deal, because what would always happen afterwards? Another prophet would come, and the other prophet, the new prophet, the next prophet would say, oh, whatever you're doing, that's all wrong. This is how you're supposed to do it. But in Islam, is there any prophet after our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? He's the last prophet. So that's why we have to make sure that we ensure that whatever he left us with, we keep it exactly in its unadulterated form. Because if we're to tamper with it, and alter it, and distort it, and change it, then is there any new prophet going to come to say, well, it's not supposed to be like that, it's supposed to be like this? No prophet is going to come. because the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is the seal of all the prophets. So that's what the big deal is, that there's no prophet to come. So that means that Allah Ta'ala has entrusted the task. Allah has taken it upon Himself, of course, to preserve the deen, but also at some level, the responsibility of preserving the deen is all of ours. Meaning that we have to do our best to ensure that we ourselves don't distort it or add anything to it. And also anyone around us, friends, family, whatever, community members, we ensure that no one around us in our surrounding community ever does anything to distort the religion. So this is sort of a communal responsibility. Do we understand? Why? Because we must preserve the religion in the way that it was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Now, what happens when we start adding things to religion? Can anyone tell me what sort of things? Yeah, in the back. People will be misguided. Okay. Any specific examples? Yeah. Okay, so you start to dilute it. You don't have a good handle over what's significant, what's not. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, of course. You're going to mix up what's truly revealed versus what's a later addition. So let's look at a few examples. Okay, so one example that, I just put a few examples. Okay, the concept of the Trinity. This is taken from the New Catholic Encyclopedia. I'll just read it up. The formulation, or let me put the pointer, 1 second. The formulation of one God in three persons was not solidly established, certainly not fully assimilated into Christian life and its profession of faith prior to the end of the 4th century. This is from the New Catholic Encyclopedia, the reference is right there. So, for example, in Christian theology, we know one very central concept of Christianity is the Trinity. Yet, is this something that Isa alayhi salam preached? It's not something that he preached. Is it something that was originally part of the religion? No, it was canonized in the Council of Nicaea in 325. But prior to that, it wasn't something that was fully agreed upon. Okay, so we see that there was a later addition to the religion. And then what did that result in? The entire central core theology of the religion became distorted. Do we understand? Okay, so that's within another religious tradition. Let's look at kind of our own religious tradition. So we have Islam as it was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ. And then people altered it a little bit. They added to it. So I put 2 examples over here. These are 2 extreme examples, but of course they're smaller, more minor forms as well. The Ismailis. Does anyone know who they are? Okay, who are they? A little bit louder, please. That's Bani Israel. This is the Ismailis. Has anyone heard of them? Aga Khani Ismailis? An offshoot of Shiism. Does anyone know what they believe or their practices or anything like that? Okay. Yeah, so all those weird beliefs that you just heard, were any of those taught by the Prophet ﷺ or the Sahaba? No. That they have their Imam, who is the sole interpreter of the religious texts, and then he has sort of like a divine status. No, that has nothing to do with Islam. So when we don't prevent bid'at, when we don't, if we're not very particular about these innovations, then what will happen is that the religion, in the form that we know it, will become completely distorted, and it could even become an entirely new faith that's not Islam whatsoever. Another example, this is even more extreme perhaps than the Ismailis, the Alawis. Has anyone heard of them? Sorry? The Syrian regime, yeah, they follow this faith, the Alawis. Even the main sect of the Shia, even the Shia regard the Alawis to be outside the fold of Islam. That's pretty extreme. So now, what do the Alawis believe? The Syrian regime they follow this faith. Does anyone know what they believe? A little bit louder, please. Okay, that's a mainstream Shia belief, but there is something more. Yeah, okay, so then the Alawis actually believe that Ali radiallahu anhu either is part of a triune God. You have Allah Ta'ala, Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and Ali. There's a triune God. Or they might just say that Ali radiallahu anhu is sort of the incarnation is basically God incarnate. Na'udhu billah. Obviously we know this is incorrect. So now is this belief, if somebody ascribes to this belief, are they even Muslim? No, they're not even Muslim. Okay, because are they believing in one God who's not like anything else? No, obviously not. So we see that if we just allow bid'ah to sort of progress unabated, and we don't curb them, we don't nip them in the bud, then what happens is that Islam, as we know it, can become completely distorted. We've seen this example in other religious traditions. We've even seen it in our own religious tradition as well. So not to say that these groups are Muslim, Ismailis and Alawis. They're not Muslim, but that's the whole point. That they started out as regular Muslims, but then these bid'at, these innovations creeped in. And no one stopped them, and it resulted in the religion becoming distorted. And perhaps even developing into a new religion. Now, these are extreme examples. Am I going to say that every single person that engages in any bid'ah is automatically outside the fold of Islam? Obviously not. But I just gave the extreme examples to sort of drive the point home. Right? Is everyone on the same page? Now the question is, okay, we understand at least why bid'ahs are bad. Now things that remain to discuss is we first need to define bid'ah, and we need to determine where we stand. Because as we know, as a normal, regular Muslim, we're being pulled in so many directions. Some people say that all bid'at are bad. Other people say, no, some of them are okay. This one is not really so bad. So where do we stand? That's what we'll discuss. Now, okay, so before we do anything, we need to define what a bid'ah is. So now there's this book that I have over here. It's in Arabic. If anyone can read Arabic, then I highly recommend it. It's an excellent book. It's called Mafhumul Bid'ah. It's by Dr. Abdul Ilah Al-Arfaj. He's a Saudi scholar from Ahsa. So anyway, he says that in this book, he says that if people were to actually define bid'ah clearly, and they give a clear definition, then much of the dispute that we have regarding bid'ah would just sort of dissipate. Because a lot of the dispute that people say, this thing is a bid'ah, other people say, no, that's not a bid'ah, that arises because we haven't clearly defined it. So that's why it's very important before we get into any discussion, especially something that's so polarizing, like bid'ah. You have people that are strongly, vehemently condemning the other party, and other people are strongly advocating what they do. It's important to clearly define things. And then once everyone agrees on a definition, then we can proceed forward with the discussion. So I just put two alternate definitions. They're both basically the same thing. They're just different definitions that people give. The first one actually I like a little bit more. Second one is what we studied in class when I was studying in South Africa. Okay, so the first one is التدين بما لم يتدين به النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ولا أصحابه. So adopting as religion that which the Prophet ﷺ and his companions did not adopt as religion. Okay, so you consider something to be a part and parcel of religion, that which the Prophet ﷺ did not do, nor his companions. Okay, and the second one is الزيادة والنقصان. Okay, it's supposed to be الزيادة والنقصان في الدين من غير إذن الشارع. Adding or subtracting to the religion without the permission of the lawgiver. Okay, so from both of these we understand that basically bid'ah is to add something to the religion, or take out for that matter, to add something to the religion, and to regard that addition to be, actually let's say it this way, to add something to the religion and to do so in a religious sense. You think that this thing that added to the religion, I am being more religious by doing this. This thing that added to deen, this will make me a better Muslim, and this is part and parcel of the religion. Do we understand? Hopefully a little bit, but it's not so clear right now, but that's because we haven't yet gotten to the rest of the discussion. Once we go into the discussion, we discuss all the angles, we'll revisit this definition and just sort of try to understand it a little bit better. Okay, so this is the gist of the definition. Now, if we look at texts, different nusus of the Sharia, different textual evidence, we see that the various texts suggest sometimes different things. Some texts might suggest that all bid'at are bad. Other ones will suggest that, well, no, some of them might be okay. So it's a little bit confusing. So one hadith that I put over here, كُلُّ مُحْتَثَةٍ بِدْعَةٍ وَكُلُّ بِدْعَةٍ ضَلَالَةٍ. Has anyone heard this before? We usually hear it in the Jummah khutbah. كُلُّ مُحْتَثَةٍ بِدْعَةٍ. Every new action is a bid'ah. So this uncategorically, unilaterally, puts the label of bid'ah on every single new action. So every new action that you do, it's a bid'ah. Do we understand? Right. So now we have some people that understand bid'ah to be something that is all-encompassing. So anything that they do, they say, brother, you must stop that because that's a bid'ah. Okay, so there's some people that take an an encompassing, overarching meaning from this hadith. But now the question that we must ask over here, I put it right over here. It's supposed to be an animation and not appear right away, but I don't know what happened. Is this ruling is it overarching and applicable to everything or not? That's what, for today, this is our essential question. Because we've all heard this hadith, that كُلُّ مُحْدَثَةٍ بِدْعَةٍ وَكُلُّ بِدْعَةٍ ضَلَالَةٍ. Every single introduced action is a bid'ah, is a reprehensible bid'ah. It's very bad. But now our question is, well, how do we understand this hadith? Does it mean really every single new action is a bid'ah? Is that really the case? Because it doesn't really, I don't know, some things might suggest otherwise. So this is our essential question for today. Is this hadith overarching and in its implication or not? Do we all understand our central question? There's actually maybe more than one central question, but let's just pretend like this is the only one for now. Okay, now the second thing is this is another hadith. In fact, this hadith is so essential that some scholars, I think it was Imam Shafi or someone, who said that if we were to just, there's so many hadith, there's tens of thousands of hadith, but if they were just 4 hadith that were there, that would be sufficient. So these 4 hadith, essentially, they kind of give us an idea of the entire deen. And each one talks about a very, very important aspect of our deen. And one of those hadith was this one. مَنْ أَحْدَثَ فِي أَمْرِنَا هَذَا مَا لَيْسَ مِنْهُ فَهُوَ رَدٌّ. Whoever introduces in this matter of ours, whoever introduces anything new in our religion, then that which is not from it, مَا لَيْسَ مِنْهُ فَهُوَ رَدٌّ, فَهُوَ مَرْدُودٌ, meaning that it is definitely rejected. Whoever introduces anything new in our religion that doesn't belong there, مَا لَيْسَ مِنْهُ, that doesn't belong, فَهُوَ رَدٌّ, it is rejected. Okay, that's one hadith. Another hadith. Okay, so now both of these seem to indicate, the first and the second hadith. First one says every new action is a bid'ah. Second one says that whoever introduces anything new, that's rejected. So both of these seem to indicate what? Not introduce new things, but something more. Something a little bit more than that. One again? All bid'ahs are wrong, right? That's what it indicates. That every single new thing that you introduce, that's wrong, it's rejected, don't do it. Okay, now there's one more hadith over here. The context is that there was somebody who needed some sadaqah. There was some cause, so then they had a fundraiser, and the Prophet ﷺ said, who will donate for this particular cause? And then there's a person who stood up and he was the first person to do so. And then after he stood up and he donated, then everyone else followed suit. Okay, so then the Prophet ﷺ said, مَنْ سَنَّ سُنَّةً حَسَنَةً, whoever starts a new practice, فَلَهُ أَجْرُهَا وَأَجْرُ مَنْ عَمِلَ بِهَا لَا يَنْقُصُ ذَلِكَ مِنْ أُجُورِهِمْ شَيْئًا. Whoever introduces a new practice or starts a new practice, then he will get the reward of that practice, and he also gets the reward of everyone else who followed suit, everyone else who followed his example. So no one is donating. And then one person finally stands up and says, okay, I'll be the first one to write the check. Does this sound familiar? Just joking. Okay, so then one person stands up, and then it sort of like sparks some sort of interest in everyone else, and then everyone else follows suit as well. So then that person gets the reward of everyone else because he was the one that served as an inspiration for everyone else. So now the key point over here, this isn't a fundraiser, I'm not going to fundraise, but the key point over here is not necessarily about fundraising, but what is it? This person is, in a sense, introducing an action, right? The Prophet ﷺ said, مَنْ سَنَّ سُنَّةً حَسَنَةً, whoever introduces an action, then he gets the reward of it and the reward of anyone else who follows. Whoever starts a new practice. Do we understand? And the hadith goes on to say, وَمَنْ سَنَّ سُنَّةً سَيِّئَةً فَعَلَيْهِ وِزْرُهَا وَوِزْرُ مَنْ عَمِلَ بِهَا لَا يَنْقُصُ ذَلِكَ مِنْ أَوْزَارِهِمْ شَيْئًا. And whoever starts a bad practice and other people follow suit, then he gets the sin of it. And he gets the sin of everyone else that he inspired. And that won't decrease from his sins, that won't decrease from the other people's sins at all. Meaning that they're giving a share of their sin to that guy, at least they have less for themselves. Nope, they get the full burden of it, and that guy who introduced it, he also gets the full burden of it as well. There's a hadith that says that no person kills another, no person murders another, except that there's some share of the sin, or there's some sin on the son of Adam. Who is the son of Adam? Not referring to me and you. Who is the son of Adam? Qabil, yeah. So he killed his brother. he was the first person to, well, murder. And then that sort of, before that there was no murder. So since he did that, then it sort of served as inspiration for all the murderers for all time. Because that idea didn't even exist in the world before. So then he gets some share of this, and we ask Allah Ta'ala to protect us. Okay, so anyway, the key point over here is that this hadith says introducing an action. Although it has its own context, but it still says that at some level. So now we find ourselves slightly conflicted, because the first two hadith that we see over here, they kind of, as it seems to us right now, they unilaterally condemn all innovated actions. Everything is rejected. Everything is misguidance, every bid'ah. This one says that if you introduce a new action, then you get the reward of it and the reward of everyone who practices on it and all that good stuff. So they seem to slightly have different implications. So a task that we have to do, or one of our tasks today, is we have to figure out how to reconcile this. So hopefully with the rest of the discussion, we will make some sense of this, some degree of conflict as it seems to us over here. So we'll discuss that. Sure. Okay. Now, okay. So actually there is this slide, but before that I'm just going to go to this. We'll just talk about one point over here, then I'll go back to the things that I mentioned that I was supposed to talk about. So now we have another question that arises that's related to our whole discussion of bid'ah. Keep in mind, up till now, we haven't yet answered anything. If anything, we might just be more confused than when we started. So please, everyone, try to listen closely for the next maybe 20 minutes or so, because, right now we're about to get into the crux of the discussion. So now, another question that arises, the first question was that, is every innovated action really a bid'ah, or some okay? Now the next question that is very related to this is that if the Prophet ﷺ didn't do something himself, he left something out, or the Sahaba left something out, they didn't do it, then is it permissible for us to do that action or not? That's the question. And what some people say is, they say if the Prophet ﷺ didn't do it, then you shouldn't do it, because his guidance is sufficient for us. لو كان خيرا ما سبقونا إليه. If it was good, then the Sahaba would have done it. But the fact that they didn't implies that it's not good. So the Prophet ﷺ not doing something implies that we shouldn't do it as well. Has anyone ever heard this before? Can you raise your hand if you ever heard anything similar to this? Okay, fewer people than I thought. I've heard it many, many times. Maybe because I just grew up in a community that was really big on this. Maybe that's the reason. So anyway, so the Prophet ﷺ said that, people say that the Prophet ﷺ didn't do something, then you shouldn't do it either. Okay, so now our second essential question is that if the Prophet ﷺ didn't do something, does that automatically mean that that thing is prohibited for us? So I'll just let that sort of you can brood over it a little bit, and we'll revisit that question in a couple of minutes. Now, what we have to right now is the main crux of the discussion. Okay, try not to read the whole slide right now, because then it'll just get confusing. We'll take it part by part. I should have made the things appear gradually, but sorry I didn't. Okay, anyway, so what we can do is let's first categorize actions, because a lot of this confusion over what is a bid'ah, what is not, it results from not properly categorizing actions. If we say, so I request that everyone not read the slide right now, what we'd say is that somebody says every single bid'ah is bad. Every single bid'ah, everything that wasn't there in the time of the Prophet ﷺ is bad, you shouldn't do it. So then one thing that somebody might say, well, did the Prophet ﷺ drive a car? He didn't. Is it permissible to drive a car? Is there anybody here who's ever driven a car before? Or at least been in a car that's being driven? Okay, so probably everyone, presumably everyone. So is driving in a car bid'ah? Did the Prophet ﷺ eat biryani? No? Or nahari, that's what probably most of us had for breakfast today for suhoor. No, but is that a bid'ah? How could we be doing that if the Prophet ﷺ didn't do it? Right? So now somebody would say every single bid'ah is bad. But somebody would say, well, what about biryani? What about nahari? What about palau? What about all those things? What about driving a car? Are those things bid'ah too? And we say, then at that point, probably some of us might have been in similar discussions before. At that point, we start scratching our head. We say, okay, well, this is getting a little bit too confusing for me. Well, we know that's not bid'ah, but we did say that every single new action is a bid'ah. So now the question is that, how can we make sense of this? So in order to make sense of this, we need to properly categorize things. Once everything is in its own respective category, then everything will become clear. So before we get into it, can anyone answer the biryani question? Let's get someone else. No one? Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Why is that not a bid'ah? Because what we've discussed up to this point is if the Prophet ﷺ didn't do it, then it's not a bid'ah. Okay, in the back? What he said, if I heard correctly, is that we don't consider it part of our religion, right? Okay, good. Okay, so then one important distinction to make, as we just heard from here and over there, that it's not part of our religion. At least, hopefully, we hope that people don't think biryani to be a religious thing. Sometimes on college campuses during Islamic Awareness Week, they have like this event called Taste of Islam. Come and taste what Islamic cuisine is. And then there's biryani. Yeah, so I highly disagree with that. I don't like Taste of Islam sort of events at Islamic Awareness Week. Anyway, so then it's actually not a Taste of Islam. It's a Taste of India, right? Or Pakistan, I'm sorry. Pakistan. Okay. So it's not a Taste of Islam whatsoever. So one important distinction to make, as I said, we need to categorize things. So the first important distinction is we need to separate religious from non-religious matters. Does that make sense? So that's our first categorization. Okay, so is biryani a religious thing? No. Is driving a car a religious thing? It's not a religious thing, it's just a normal thing. So that would not fall under the purview of our discussion. We all understand that? The first important distinction that we make is religious from non-religious matters. I didn't even put that in my distinction because hopefully that's obvious. In my categorization, I didn't include that, but then that's something that hopefully that's obvious. So now what we understand from that is that our discussion today will exclusively center around religious things. Okay. Now within religious things, there needs to be some further categorization, some further distinction. Why? Did the Prophet ﷺ, was there a full-time, if anybody is not aware, this is a masjid, but in addition to being a masjid, this is also a madrasa as well, a Darul Ulum as well, as a full 7-year course that starts with learning Arabic, it ends with the culmination of reading Sahih al-Bukhari and studying it in depth. Right? Our dear Imam Hafid Farhan is in the 7th year and about to graduate inshallah in a month. And there's 11 other students like him. So now, did this course exist in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the 7-year course? No. Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu was one of the greatest ulama of the Sahaba. So was Ubay bin Ka'b. So was Zayd bin Thabit. So was Abdullah bin Umar. All these people are great ulama from the Sahaba. Abdullah bin Abbas. Did any one of them graduate from Darsul Nizami? The 7-year course or the 6-year course some places. Did any of them study Sahih al-Bukhari? No? Okay, it seems that we're not really confident in our answer. Did any of them, Imam Bukhari passed away in 256, that's over 200 years later. No, none of them studied Sahih al-Bukhari. So then how could they be ulama if they weren't? How could they be ulama if they didn't graduate from Darsul Nizami? That's the thing. So now so what we see from this is that this whole institutionalized Islamic learning, it didn't exist in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So is it permissible or not? Did it exist in the time of the Prophet ﷺ? This sort of formal institutionalized learning? No, it didn't exist. So now, how can we say it's permissible? Because now this is a religious thing. It's not just a question of eating palaw or biryani anymore. This is actually studying your deen to become a scholar, becoming more learned. It's a religious thing, so then why is this permissible then if it didn't exist in the time of the Prophet ﷺ? Do we understand? Okay, so okay, we won't discuss this yet, but that's just something to think about. Another thing is that, okay, so if somebody decides to have a gathering of dhikr, and they say, let's read Subhanallah, or let's read La ilaha illa anta subhanaka inni kuntu minal zalimin, let's read that 1,000 times, or let's read that 10,000 times. Okay? Do we have any explicit text, any hadith or something like that, that says that the Sahaba gathered and read La ilaha illa anta subhanaka inni kuntu minal zalimin, 10,000 times or 1,000 times. Nope, I've never come across anything like that. So then, again, that is a religious matter. So then, how are we saying that's permissible? Because the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba didn't do it. Do we understand? So now, once you get into religious matters, it becomes a little bit more confusing. So that's why categorization is very, very important. So this is the main slide of the whole presentation. So now you all have permission to look at it. So everyone can look. Okay, so anyway, but we'll discuss it. Okay, try not to read everything at once because it'll become a little bit confusing. But we'll go through it together. So there's two types of actions over here. The first type of action is ta'abbudiyat. These are acts of ibadah that are maqsood, that's an Arabic word, or the word to it, that are basically a goal, that are something that are desired in and of themselves. Okay, so acts of ibadah that are carried out ritualistically. Do we understand? That's the first category. The second thing is wasa'il. Wasa'il or adat, they are means to the acts of ibadah. So this is the first important distinction to make. We have the ta'abbudiyat, acts of ibadah that are carried out ritualistically. That's number one. Number two are wasa'il, things that are means to those acts of ibadah. So this is the first important distinction to make. Okay, so now, for example, praying, 5 salahs. Let's say that somebody says praying is so good. We prayed dhuhr right now and we hear that praying is so good, salah is so great, and we hear all these great things about salah. So why not just pray more? Why not, dhuhr is just 4 rakahs, but it'd be better, why don't we just do 6? Why don't we just do 10? Because that's even better, because the more you pray, the better it is. So what's wrong with that? Come on. Good. So this is from the acts of ibadat that are carried out ritualistically. Meaning that the Sharia has instituted this act of ibadah, this act of worship, and defined the parameters for it as well. So if we introduce anything in this, then that would, by definition, be a bid'ah. Why? Because this person that's praying 6 rakahs for dhuhr. Well, first of all, the Sharia has defined the parameters. But let's just say somebody decides to pray 6 rakahs for dhuhr, or 10, because it's even better. They say, well, tarawih is 20 rakahs, but fard salah is more important than tarawih, because tarawih is sunnah. So let's just make our fard 20 rakahs as well. So let me just pray 20 rakahs for dhuhr. So that would be bad, because they're thinking that this will help them get closer to Allah. They're adding something to the religion. Okay? Remember, if we go back a little bit, oopsies. The definition of bid'ah is adopting something as religion, that which the Prophet ﷺ did not adopt as religion. In other words, you think that this thing is necessary. That's one understanding of it. The other thing is that you think that this is necessary. Well, let's just say that. You think this is necessary, or you think that this thing gets you closer to Allah Ta'ala. So now if somebody prays more dhuhr, for example, prays 20 rakahs for dhuhr, then they are thinking that that's part of religion. They're adding something to the religion. So that would be categorically rejected. And then why is that? We'll discuss it in just a minute. We'll just clarify a little bit more. Now the second thing is wasa'il. Second category. Things that are means to the acts of ibadah. So now these things are not carried out ritualistically. Okay. So now when I said adding to the number of rakahs that you pray in dhuhr, is that something that's ritualistic or non-ritualistic? It's ritualistic, right? It's carried out as a ritual. What about studying in a madrasa in a 7-year course or a 6-year course? Is that carried out ritualistically, or is it just a means to the act of ibadah? It's a means, right? Do we understand? So that's an important distinction. So what we understand from that is that if somebody introduces something new in one of the means, then that's not going to be considered to be a bid'ah. So now, did this 7-year course, did Sahih al-Bukhari, did any of those things exist in the time of the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba? No. But we introduce these things not to be acts of ibadah that are sort of maqsood or desired in themselves. Rather, these are just a means. We say the goal is ilm. The goal is to gain knowledge about Islam. Now, your means to that, you can take a course on the internet, you can take a 1-year course, you can take a weekend course, you can do whatever. You can just study informally, you can read books. And as long as something gets you to that goal, then that's fine. So it doesn't really matter what the means is because the goal is the same. So we understand from this that our second category of actions that are not carried out ritualistically, actions that are just means to the goal, means to the end. If somebody introduces something new, somebody introduces a new form, then is that going to be considered to be a bid'ah or not? Anyone? Okay, that answer was not as confident as I was hoping for. That is not going to be considered to be a bid'ah. Why? Because it's just a means. A bid'ah is only when you tamper with the end goal, the thing that's actually desired. Okay, now this ta'abbudiyat, acts of ibadah that are goals in of themselves and they're carried out ritualistically, these divide into two things. As you can see, I put A and I put B. So number one, so these are acts of ibadah that are carried out ritualistically. They're not merely a means to something, rather they are ritualistic. They're a goal in of themselves. Now there's two categories of this. The first category is acts of ibadah that the Sharia instituted with a particular form and with particular parameters. So in those things, if the Sharia gave a particular form and particular parameters to it, then if you add anything new, that will automatically be a bid'ah. So if somebody wants to pray 6 rak'ahs for Dhuhr rather than 4, then is that good? That's automatically a bid'ah. Why? Number one, it's carried out ritualistically. And number two, it is, anyone? Right, the Sharia gave certain parameters to it. And what are the parameters for Salatul Dhuhr? It's only 4 rak'ahs, right? Now, okay, there's B as well. So in the ritualistic acts of worship, there's two categories. First one, things that have definitive parameters. Number two, there's not a definitive parameter or form. So for example, dhikr. So now if somebody did what does the Quran say? Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu dhkurullaha dhikran kathira. Oh, those who believe, remember Allah a lot. Remember Allah excessively. So the Quran tells us to remember Allah excessively. But how much is excessive? Can anyone tell me what that is, to remember Allah a lot? There's no parameter to it. That's the whole point, right? It just left open. So now in something that the Sharia has left open, even if it's ritualistic, if you introduce some sort of form or some sort of structure to it, then that will not be considered to be a bid'ah, for the most part. Do we understand? So let me go over this one more time, then we'll discuss some examples to hopefully clarify it a little bit. So there's two sorts of actions. Okay, keep in mind we're only talking about religious things. First thing is acts of worship that are carried out ritualistically. Okay, those are divided into things that have a particular form or particular parameters, and things that don't have a particular form and don't have set parameters. Do we understand? Okay, so in number 1A, if you introduce anything new, automatically it's a bid'ah. Why? Because it's carried out ritualistically and the Sharia has given a particular form to it, so any new form that you introduce will automatically be a bid'ah. If the Sharia has not instituted a particular form for it, if the Sharia has not given a particular form for it, then if you add something new, not really add something new, but you introduce something or something like that, then for the most part it won't be considered to be a bid'ah. There's a certain caveat to this which we'll discuss in just a minute. Okay, for the most part it's not a bid'ah, and we'll get into examples in a second. Now the second category of actions are means to number one. So number two serves as a means to number one. They're not carried out ritualistically. So these things will, whatever form you introduce, it's not going to be considered to be a bid'ah. For the most part, again, there's one more caveat, but we'll just discuss that in a second. Question? B? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, okay, that's a major typo. I'm sorry. Okay, sorry. Thanks for pointing that out. Let me just correct that right now. Okay, maybe that's why everyone was confused. I'm sorry. Second bullet? Which one? Oh yeah, that's an example of it. Yeah, okay, so now we'll discuss examples right now. So now the examples are 5 salahs, hajj, zakat, etc. So somebody says that, I just gave the example, so now we're going to talk about 1A. Okay, I'm sorry, this is, I guess maybe there's some typos and stuff, please forgive me. This is supposed to be this, not tisi, or whatever, however you pronounce that. Okay, that's also a typo in case anyone was confused. Okay, so anyway, so 1 is divided into A and B. Okay, so 1A. The Sharia has, there are acts of ibadah that are carried out ritualistically. Sharia has given a particular form for it. So now in this category, let's discuss some examples. One example is our regular salah. Somebody wants to add rakahs to the salah that they pray. For dhuhr, we're going to pray 6 rakahs instead of 4. Anything that you add to 1A will be considered to be a bid'ah. Somebody says, well, salah is so good, instead of 5 daily salahs at a fard, let's do 6, let's do 7. Again, that would be a bid'ah. Do we understand? Why? Because the Sharia has given particular parameters for this. If you add anything to that, it's a bid'ah. Do we understand? Good. Now number 2. The Sharia has not instituted a particular form for it. The Sharia just says, just do it. So then in those things, whatever form you institute, it's not going to be a bid'ah because it was left open to begin with. So the Sharia says do a lot of dhikr. So somebody says, okay, I'm going to sit and read Subhanallah 1,000 times right now. Is that a bid'ah? It's not a bid'ah. The Sharia says, remember Allah a lot, remember Allah. So isn't that remembrance of Allah? Sure, why not? So, by definition, since the Sharia has not given a particular form for this thing, if we, add a form, then it was left open. So the Sharia is giving us that sort of leeway. So if we want to say every day, after Asr, I'm going to read Subhanallah 1,000 times. Or every day after Dhuhr, we're going to get together and read La ilaha illa anta subhanaka inni kuntu minal zalimin 1,000 times. Whatever. Or we're going to read Surah Yasin, we're going to sit and read Surah Yasin 40 times. Now, the Sharia, our Islamic law tells us just read a lot of Quran, do a lot of dhikr. So it's left open. There's no form that's prescribed for it. So if we introduce a form, then that wouldn't be a bid'ah. Do we understand? Okay, there's one caveat which I'll discuss in a second. Now number 2, means. So now these are not carried out ritualistically. They're not seen as goals in and of themselves. So for example, you build a madrasa. Is that just a means to the goal? And what is the goal? Propagation of knowledge, right? So since it's just, whether you have a madrasa that has a 1-year program or a 7-year program or a 6-year program, your madrasa has, 10 rooms or, space for 1,000 students or whatever it is, then that's not a bid'ah. What about a Quran competition? This happens a lot in Saudi, Dubai. They have a famous Quran competition every Ramadan. Did the Sahaba ever have a Quran competition in which there are monetary prizes that are being given or anything like that? There's no Quran competition that I ever heard of or ever came across. Yet, why do we say that it's permissible? Isn't it a bid'ah? Because anything that's introduced, anything that's new, anything that's innovated is a bid'ah. So why would this not be a bid'ah? Promoting the reading of the Quran, okay, but let's talk about it in terms of this. Anyone? There you go, that's what I was looking for. Okay, in terms of the terminology that we're using over here, just so that we don't get confused or our thoughts don't get scattered, it's a means to the goal. Anything that is a means, and if you introduce a form in that, it will not be considered to be a bid'ah. Okay, with one caveat, which I am getting to. Okay, so now what is the goal over here? Actual act of ibadah is reading the Quran. So what does this do? This encourages people to read the Quran, because they say that if I read Quran really well or I memorize it really well, then what will happen? I'll be recognized or I'll get some sort of monetary prize. So it serves as an incentive. So you get so many people who read Quran a lot more, right? So it is a means to the goal. Spreading the deen. Okay, so let's say, for example, some people say that if you go on a trip for da'wah, you go in tabligh, then that is a bid'ah. Why? Did the Prophet ﷺ ever go for 40 days? Well, it might have been, but not really. It's not really so explicit. Those numbers or days are not counted really. So did he ever, so if you go for 40 days, you go and you stay in the masjid, you do all those things are bid'ah because the Sahaba and the Prophet ﷺ didn't go for 3 days, didn't go for 40 days or whatever it is. So now what we would say is that, well, you haven't understood the proper categorization of actions. Why? Because does anybody regard that to be a goal or something that's carried out ritualistically? An act of ibadah that's sort of a ritual in itself? No, rather that is a means. And what is the means? Or what is it a means to? Right. getting closer to Allah, spreading Islam, propagation of deen, exactly. So now we are going to propagate deen. Now there are many different ways you can propagate deen. You can propagate deen by writing articles, distributing pamphlets. You can make lectures online. You can go to different masajid and encourage people to, do tawbah or start praying and stuff like that. All those are different ways to get to the end goal, which is propagating deen. So because this falls under the category of wasa'il, this falls under the category of things that are means, then it's not going to be considered to be a bid'ah. Do you understand? Why? Because bid'at are only things that are end goals in themselves. Do we understand? Only things that are carried out ritualistically, and specifically within that, things that have a particular form. Do we understand? Okay, compiling the Quran. The Prophet ﷺ never compiled the Quran together. When did that happen? Does anyone know? Right, okay, so first Abu Bakr radiallahu anh did the initial steps of just gathering everything together. It was officially compiled and stuff in the time of Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anh. So that never happened. Putting dots and harakat on the Quran. Has anybody seen like an ancient manuscript of the Quran? You can't really read it. It's so difficult to read. Even if you're a hafiz, you have to stare at it for a long time and be like, okay, which ayah is this? And then it's really hard to read. So dots, harakat, all those are new things. Do we understand? So now why is that permissible? Does anyone regard the dots or the harakat or the putting of the Quran in a book form, does anyone regard that to be a goal by itself? No, what is the goal? Just reading the Quran and understanding the Quran as well. And this is a means to that. Do we understand? So because it falls in the category of, someone complete my sentence? Means, thank you. It will not be considered to be a bid'ah. Now, in all of these things, so just to, this is the main slide, so that's why I'm just going a little bit slow with this. There's two categories of actions. Acts of ibadah that are carried out ritualistically, and things that are just means to those. Those that are carried out ritualistically, two categories. Things that have a particular form and things that don't. Okay, and then the means, they're just means, right? And we discussed examples for all of those things. Now, the ruling over here is that anything in 1A, any introduced act in 1A, as we see from this, is automatically a bid'ah. Why? Because the Sharia has given a particular form. If an action is introduced in 1B, if an action is introduced in 1B or in 2, then it's not a bid'ah. It's not a bid'ah for the most part. However, as I said, there's one caveat, which we'll discuss right now. It's only going to be a bid'ah if the person considers that to be necessary. If they consider that to be part of deen. Do we understand? So now let's revisit our definition. So our definition was, that you adopt as religion, you adopt as deen, that which the Prophet ﷺ and companions did not adopt as deen. So what you're doing right now, you specifically consider that to be a part of deen. Okay, now going back to what we were talking about, I said if something is introduced in 1B or in 2, it's not a bid'ah, but however, if somebody does consider it to be part of deen, then it will be considered to be a bid'ah. Okay, so for example, if somebody believes that in order to be saved from Jahannam, in order for your iman to be complete, then you must go for 40 days. Somebody believes that, so then now this is a distinction from the example I gave before. And if you talk to people that are involved in tabligh, they will say this is just a means. So if it's a means, it's fine. But let's just suppose, hopefully no one has this idea, but let's just suppose that somebody thinks that this is necessary. If you don't go for 40 days, your iman, it's in question. I don't know if you'll be able to be saved from Jahannam or not. Right? So now they're considering this to be part of deen. So then in that case, what would happen? That becomes a bid'ah, right? Because now anything but that by its like inherent nature, anything that falls in category 2, wasa'il, something that's a means to something else, by its very nature, it's not part of deen. It's just a means to get there. But if you consider this sort of means to get there now actually part and parcel of deen, then you have now effectively added something to deen. And remember, in the very beginning, what did we talk about in our definition of bid'ah? A bid'ah is, anyone? Adding something to deen, right? So now if you consider this wasila, this means, now a part of deen, then what have you done? Added something to deen. Do we understand? Now similarly, okay, so I gave an example of 2. Now I said 1b. Automatically, it's default, we would hope that it's not a bid'ah. Anything introduces something in 1b. It's not a bid'ah. However, if you consider this to be necessary, then what you have done is you've added it to deen. So now you say that we're having a gathering of dhikr, we're going to read, Surah Yasin 41 times. We're going to, read Alhamdulillah, or we're going to read salawat, 1,000 times, or everyone has to stand up and read salawat. And then if you don't, everyone stands up and reads durud or something like that. So now is reading durud, is reading salawat, is it a good thing? Yeah, it's a good thing. Allah Ta'ala says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ وَمَلَائِكَتَهُ يُصَلُّونَ عَلَى النَّبِيِّ يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا صَلُّوا عَلَيْهِ وَسَلِّمُوا تَسْلِيمًا. Indeed, Allah and His angels, they send salutations, they send blessings on the Prophet. So, those who believe, you also do so as well. So now we know that we're supposed to do it, but now if somebody says we're going to have a gathering of salawat, a gathering of durud, and if you don't participate in it, or they get angry at you if you don't participate in it, they say you must, it's necessary, it's incumbent for you to participate in this, then maybe they're not even explicitly saying it, but at least by their tone, at least by their, their choice of words or whatever, what can we gauge from that? They're considering this to be essential. If they can, and they are rebuking you if you don't participate, you say, sorry, I have to go. But you say, no, you have to participate. Call whoever you are, whatever appointment, cancel it, schedule it for tomorrow. Make sure you participate. I'm just joking. Make sure you participate in this. Then they are effectively showing that they believe this to be an essential part of religion. So if they believe that to be necessary, then what have they done? Something that the Sharia didn't institute a particular form for, a particular time, particular anything, you are instituting that and believing that to now be essential. So in doing that, what have you done? You have added something to deen. So now this all goes back to our definition in the beginning. You add az-ziyadatu wa nuqsanu fi deen. You add something to deen min ghayri idhn ash-shari', without the permission of Allah Ta'ala. Do we understand? Yeah. So again, just to recap, okay, I thought this would be short, but I'm already near the end of my time. I'm sorry. I say that every day. I guess I underestimate how long it's going to take. Okay, so there's 2 acts of ibadah. If you introduce anything in 1A, it's automatic a bid'ah. You introduce something in 1B. It's not a bid'ah unless you believe it to be necessary. You introduce something in 2. It's not a bid'ah unless you believe it to be necessary. Do we understand? Yeah, so this is just to recap. Anything introduced in 1A will be a bid'ah. Anything introduced in 1B or 2 will not be a bid'ah if only thought to be necessary. Now the question is that arises, okay, we're going to wrap up very soon, so please just stay tuned till the end. Now the question that arises is that the hadith that we did in the beginning, where is it? Not that one. كُلُّ مُحْدَثَةٍ بِدْعَةٍ وَكُلُّ بِدْعَةٍ ضَلَالَةٍ. Every introduced action is a bid'ah. Every bid'ah is misguidance. So if we say every introduced action is a bid'ah, then what would we say for 1B? What would we say for 2? Well, those wouldn't fall under the ambit of that hadith. So we understand from this that this hadith, كُلُّ مُحْدَثَةٍ بِدْعَةٍ, every action is a bid'ah, what is it talking about? It's not talking about every new action, because in that case we wouldn't be able to have Darul Salam, because Darul Salam didn't exist in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. This madrasa course that we study, it didn't exist. Having a dars on bid'ah with the PowerPoint and slides and all that stuff, it didn't exist. It just simply wasn't there in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So now, my question to you is that this hadith over here, every introduced action is a bid'ah. Do you think that this is am in its implication? Do you think that it's all encompassing? What does this refer to? This refers to just 1A and 1B and 2 with a few caveats. Just if you think it to be part of the religion. Do we understand? But if something is introduced in 1B, something is introduced in 2, means, wasa'il, then it will not be a bid'ah. It won't fall under the ambit of that hadith. Do we understand? Great. Okay, now the second hadith that we discussed. مَنْ أَحْدَثَ فِي أَمْرِنَا هَذَا مَا لَيْسَ مِنْهُ فَهُوَ رَدٌّ. Whoever introduces something in this matter of ours, مَا لَيْسَ مِنْهُ, something that doesn't belong to it, then it is rejected. So now over here, this statement over here, مَا لَيْسَ مِنْهُ, is very important. Because if somebody says that, okay, every day we're going to read, 1,000 salawat after dhuhr every day. Or every day we're going to have a dars on Aqidah after dhuhr. Did that exist in the time of the Prophet ﷺ in its particular form? Nope, it didn't exist. So how are we sitting here today? How are we having a dars of Aqidah after Dhuhr every day? Because we would say that if we look at this hadith, it means that whoever introduces into this matter of ours, meaning our religion, that which doesn't belong from it, it is rejected. So now over here, a dars of Aqidah, or doing dhikr, does that belong to the religion or is it outside the religion? It belongs to the religion. So if you introduce something within the religion that belongs to it, you're not really introducing anything. The Sharia just didn't give any form for it. The Sharia says, seek knowledge. The Sharia says, do dhikr. And we're just giving some structure to that. There's nothing wrong with that because it's not ma laysa minhu. It's not something that doesn't belong. Do we all understand? That's the key point. Okay, now just to just really quickly, wrap up hopefully soon. Okay, so now I introduced this idea before. That what about the things that the Prophet ﷺ left out? If the Prophet ﷺ didn't do something, doesn't that mean that we shouldn't do it as well? Again, things become a lot more clear if we categorize them properly. Okay, so there we go, okay. Okay, so we'll get to the categorization in a second. Okay, so let me just mention a few points. There are 4 sources of Islamic legislation. If anybody studies legal theory, Islamic legal theory, usul al-fiqh, will understand there's 4 sources of legislation. Quran, Sunnah, Ijma, and Qiyas. Right? The Quran, the Sunnah, unanimous consensus, and Qiyas, legal analogy, or deductive analogy. Now, in one of these, are there 4 sources or 5 sources of legislation? 4 sources. Meaning that tark, the Prophet ﷺ's leaving of a particular action, is not a source of legislation for us. So if the Prophet ﷺ did not do something, does that automatically mean that we must abstain from that thing? Not necessarily. Somebody says, oh, well, it's not a 5th category on its own, but it falls under hadith. Well, if we look at the definitions of sunnah, the definitions of hadith from the scholars of hadith, we see that sunnah, hadith, it comprises the actions, the statements, the aqwal, the af'al, and also the approvals of the Prophet ﷺ. So hadith is 3 things. We discussed this briefly, I think, was it yesterday or 2 days ago. What is hadith? The actions, the statements, and the approvals of the Prophet ﷺ. Is one of those things the things that the Prophet ﷺ left out? It's not one of those things. So tark, the Prophet ﷺ's leaving of a particular action, does it fall under the ambit of hadith? Does it fall in the category of hadith? It doesn't. Right? Now I just put 2 hadith here from Ibn Majah. So this is the very first hadith in Sunan Ibn Majah. مَا أَمَرْتُكُمْ بِهِ فَخُذُوهُ وَمَا نَهِيتُكُمْ عَنْهُ فَانْتَهُ. Whatever I have ordered you, do it. Whatever I prohibited you from doing, abstain from it. So over here, does it say in whatever I've left, whatever I've not done myself, also abstain from it? Does it say that in the hadith? It doesn't say that. So right now, if somebody just reads that first hadith, they'll be a little bit confused. Okay, I'm sorry, it's going a little bit long. Are you guys getting tired or can I continue for another 5 minutes? Okay, good. So now if you just read this first hadith, whatever I've ordered you, do it. Whatever I prohibited you from, forbade you from doing, abstain from it. So the hadith doesn't mention anything about actions that the Prophet ﷺ left out. So if somebody just reads this first hadith, they'll have no conclusion. They won't know. But then Imam Ibn Majah perhaps realized that this question might arise in somebody's mind. So therefore, the exact next hadith that he put after this, he explained this concept. The next hadith that he put is ذَرُونِي مَا تَرَكْتُكُمْ. Whatever I've not done, whatever I've not told you do it or don't do it, whatever I've left, whatever I was silent on, leave it. Don't even ask about it. Meaning that it's, for the most part, it's permissible for you to do. Do you understand? Okay. So then Imam Ibn Majah realized that this question might arise in somebody's mind. So that's why the next hadith he put is this. Whatever I've left out, don't ask about it, meaning that it's permissible for you to do. Do you understand? Okay. Now, let's look at the approach of the Sahaba. If the Prophet ﷺ left something out, then did that mean that they automatically, categorically abstain from that action? So we probably all heard the hadith of Bilal radiallahu anhu. The Prophet ﷺ said that, I heard your footsteps in front of me in Jannah. What great action did you do that led you into Jannah, or that caused you entrance into Jannah? Does anyone know? Yeah, so Tahiyyatul Wudu, another narration, Tahiyyatul Adhan. So after doing wudu, he prayed 2 rak'ahs. Another narration, after doing adhan, like he was a mu'adhin, he would pray 2 rakats. Whatever it is. So the Prophet ﷺ didn't tell him that do this action. What happened? He introduced it from his own side. But did he introduce something that was within the ambit of religion or outside of it? Within, exactly. Does the Quran, Hadith, do they say that we should pray a lot? Yeah. So then, doesn't it fall under that whole category of things that you should, that order that you should pray? Of course, right? I'll just mention one more. There is a Sahabi who stood up in the Salah, and then he said that the Prophet ﷺ said, Sami Allahu liman hamida. And he said, Rabbana laka alhamd, hamdan kathiran tayyiban mubarakan fi. Has anyone heard this before? Yeah. So this Sahabi said that. And then nobody had ever said anything like this before. Afterwards, the Prophet ﷺ said, who said that? And then no one said anything. The Prophet ﷺ asked again, who said that? No one said anything again. Then the Prophet ﷺ said, okay, you didn't say anything bad, just who said that? And then the Sahabi, he said, oh, then it was me. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, I saw so many angels that were rushing to take your statement, to take it and lift it up. So this Sahabi introduced something from his own side. Hamdan kathiran tayyiban mubarakan fi. No one was saying it before. He introduced it. Why? Because it didn't fall outside the scope of what was prohibited and what's not. So we see from this, and please don't misunderstand this. Don't try to just be like, okay, this is a green light, now I can just introduce anything that was the Sharia silent on. Just bear with me a little bit. Okay, so this Sahabi introduced it. And then the Prophet ﷺ condoned his action. So we see from this that sometimes Sahaba would sometimes add or introduce something from their own side, and then the Prophet ﷺ would condone that action. Do we understand? So then did the Sahaba view that whatever the Prophet ﷺ did, if he didn't do anything, then we absolutely need to abstain from that thing? Not necessarily. If something is falls within the ambit of religion, within the ambit of deen, things that Allah Ta'ala has not, so two things, either Allah Ta'ala it's a ritual act of ibadah, but Allah did not give a particular form for it, like dhikr, then you can do it. Like salah, you can just pray salah, like nafil salah, you can pray anytime. Or it's a means, then also you can just introduce it. Do you understand? The Sahaba understood this. They understood that in category 1A, we don't introduce anything, but then in anything else, if the Sharia has given some degree of leniency, the Sharia left it open, then you can introduce something as long as you don't think it to be necessary. Do we understand that? That's the key point. Now, so as I said, let's categorize the actions that the Prophet ﷺ left out. Matrukat, things that the Prophet ﷺ left out. So there's two categories. Either the situation did not exist in his time. Okay? So is it permissible to study Sahih al-Bukhari? Yeah. Why? Because Sahih al-Bukhari didn't exist in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Is it permissible to drive your car to the masjid? Yeah. Why? These situations didn't exist in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So somebody says the Prophet ﷺ didn't do it, so you shouldn't do it. Well, we first need to clearly delineate those things that existed in his time from those things that did not exist in his time. So if the situation didn't exist in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, that's automatically out of the purview of our discussion. Do we understand? Now we're talking about things that existed in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Yeah. Okay. Now we have things that the Prophet ﷺ left out intentionally and things that he left out unintentionally, or things that he left out incidentally. Okay. So the Prophet ﷺ, for example, in the adhan, he instructed this is the way adhan should be said. And then at the very end of the adhan, what is the last statement of the adhan? Anyone know? Well, that's only half of the shahada. Why don't we just make it La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah? Because why do we just say half of it? Do we understand? Well, the situation did exist in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and he intentionally left it out. Do we understand? Okay. In other words, if we want to rephrase this in terms of our discussion from before, this is something that was instituted ritually and given a definitive parameter. Do we understand? Remember in the context of our discussion, hopefully we haven't forgotten by now. Okay. And now, so that's one category. The second thing is something that the Prophet ﷺ left out incidentally. So, for example, did the Prophet ﷺ himself pray 2 rakahs for wudu? No. Was that because it was prohibited? No, it just incidentally, he just didn't do it. So, again, that would not be prohibited. Okay, again, to reiterate it in terms of our terminology from before, what category would this fall in under? So, to 2 rakats for wudu, something that, in this case, the Prophet ﷺ left out incidentally. No, in terms of our terminology from before, from our slide. 1B, right? The Sharia didn't give a particular form for it. So in that case, it's okay, right? Okay. Now let's just briefly apply our knowledge. Now, Quran competitions. Okay, now let me ask you, is it permissible or not permissible? Okay, now I just need one person to raise their hand and tell me why it's permissible in terms of our discussion. Yeah. It's a means, good. What about madrasas, building a madrasa? Is it permissible? Okay, you tell me. It's a means, good. What about tabligh, going in 40 days for tabligh? Is that permissible or not? Okay, how about somebody who's gone for 40 days? You answer this. Okay. There you go, it's a means, right? I haven't gone myself, so that's why I didn't answer the question. Okay, the last one is Miladun Nabi. Okay, this is a question probably many people probably had in their minds. Does everyone know what it is? No? Miladun Nabi is celebrating the birthday of the Prophet ﷺ. Now, this is a very polarizing discussion. We're just going to end with this. Well, with one more point after this, actually. Okay, so celebrating the birthday of the Prophet ﷺ. So is that something that you can do or you're not allowed to do? Some people say you absolutely must celebrate the birthday of the Prophet ﷺ. If you don't, then you're somebody who insults the Prophet ﷺ. Other people say, no, it's a bid'ah, stay away from it. So where do we fall? So what do? We see some masjids around, maybe a few of them in Chicago, they have Miladun Nabi celebrations. Other masjids don't. Other masjids, they fall somewhere in the middle. They have a Sirah conference, which is sort of the same thing. And what do they have in a Sirah conference? They have lectures about the Prophet ﷺ, they have nasheeds, they have recitation of Quran. What do they have in a Miladun Nabi thing? Pretty much the same stuff, right? So it's kind of like a similar concept. So, but they're just calling it a different thing and they're removing a few things. Okay, so Miladun Nabi, is this permissible or not permissible? Okay. So let's just try to categorize this because remember, it's important to categorize everything. So now what is the goal over here? To increase the love of the Prophet ﷺ. And now if we're just going about our daily lives, going about like regular work days or school or whatever, and then we don't really engage with the seerah or anything like that, then, okay, is our love for the Prophet ﷺ going to increase? Well, normally like it just stays constant, right? But then what if we hear a bunch of lectures about how the Prophet ﷺ was so great? Then do you think our love for the Prophet ﷺ will increase? Yeah. So now what is something that definitely is desired, something that's definitely maqsood within our religion? To have love for the Prophet ﷺ. This is one of the most important parts of our religion. Now, is this a means to it? Miladun Nabi or Sirah conference, whatever, it is a means to it. Okay. So that, everyone acknowledges that. But now, so should it be permissible or not permissible? So there's two considerations over here. The first consideration is that if you believe this to be necessary, if you say that we're having this Miladun Nabi thing, if you don't come, you're gustakh Rasul. You don't come, then you're insulting the Prophet ﷺ. Then what does that show? That shows that you believe it to be necessary. So in that case, if you're believing it to be necessary, then what would happen? It becomes a bid'ah. If you're just having a Sirah conference, like, yes, they do have it in Rabiul Awwal too. Sometimes Rabiul Thani. That's still like designating a time for it. But okay, so you have a Sirah conference. Then isn't it a means to the particular goal, which is having love for the Prophet ﷺ? If you don't believe it to be necessary, if somebody doesn't go to the Dar es Salaam Sirah conference, somebody doesn't go to the MSI Sirah conference, then does somebody say, I'm sorry, you need to like check your iman to see if you're actually a proper Muslim or not because you didn't attend the Sirah conference? Does anyone say that? No one says that. So if you are not going to the conference, celebration, whatever you want to call it, then, well, if you don't believe it to be part of deen, then it's not a bid'ah. Now, okay, that's one consideration that we need to consider, that for milad, something like that, celebrating the birthday of the Prophet ﷺ, or let's just say it like this, having a gathering in remembrance of the Prophet ﷺ. If you believe it to be necessary, you are adding to religion. So then it would be wrong. If you don't believe it to be necessary, then it's great. Now, the last thing, this is something related to our what we're just saying about Milad al-Nabi. Another thing is called al-bid'atul idafiyya. Not a real bid'ah, not a haqiqi bid'ah, but a relative bid'ah. So if anybody, you don't really need to worry about the terminology so much. If you're like a student and you're studying here, then sure, you can remember the terminology. Otherwise, it's not really such a big deal. Even if you're studying somewhere else, you can still remember it too, right? Okay, so anyway, a relative bid'ah. What does this mean? This means that the person himself, you don't believe the action to be necessary, but it can give off the impression that it's necessary to the onlooker. The onlooker might think that maybe this is an act of ibadah in its particular form. Do we understand? So this maybe falls under 1B. Maybe it falls under 2. The Sharia has not given a particular form for it. Or it's just a means. Maybe it's something like that. But you add all these parameters to it such that people think that now it's necessary, it's a specific act of ibadah with all its distinctions. Then in that case, then you are giving off the impression that it's a bid'ah. So it's not a bid'ah haqiqiyah. It's not an actual bid'ah. Maybe you don't believe that it's necessary, but you are giving off the impression, and maybe uneducated or just normal onlooker would believe that it's necessary due to all the parameters that you added to it. In that case, it should still be abstained from. Now if somebody says, our Sirah conference, we're just going to have on the weekend, whether it's the 12th of Rabi al-Awwal or whether it's the 20th of Rabi al-Awwal, we're just going to have it on the weekend, then that's fine. But if somebody says we must have it on the 12th, and it must be on the 12th, there's no other option. Then if somebody insists on that, then what impression are they giving off? That in its particular form, it's necessary. If you ask them, well, is it followed to have it on the 12th? If they say yes, automatic is a bid'ah. If they say no, but we just need to have it on the 12th. Because that's, well, some people believe that's when the Prophet ﷺ was born. In that case, then maybe they don't believe it, but they're giving off the impression that it's a bid'ah. Okay, I just wanted to give one example. Has anyone heard about something called Salatul Raghaib? Salatul Raghaib. Anyone? No? Okay, mashallah. Okay, maybe if somebody, maybe it's not so common here. Maybe if anybody lived in India or Pakistan, then you might be more common over there, right? If anybody's from India. So Salatul Raghaib. So what this is a certain salah that, I don't even know the specifics myself. I don't do it, just as a disclaimer. Okay, it's a certain salah that people pray. I think it's the first Friday of Rajab, between Maghrib and Isha, I think like 12 rak'ahs, and each rak'ah you read a particular thing. So it's a very specific thing. You read this surah this many times, this surah that many times. You do it on this particular day, this particular time of year. You do it, and the parameters are very specific. Now there is a narration that talks about Salat al-Raghaib, but this narration is fabricated. It's mawdu'. Okay? So is it permissible to act on a mawdu' hadith, on a fabricated hadith? Obviously not, because it's not a hadith, it's fabricated. Okay, so now in the 600s, you had two of the greatest scholars of the time, Hafiz ibn Salah, and you have Izzuddin ibn Abd al-Salam. Hafiz ibn Salah himself, he's actually one of my favorite scholars. Hafiz ibn Salah. He's one of the most influential scholars in ulum al-hadith of all time. You have Hafiz ibn Salah and you have Izzuddin ibn Abd al-Salam. And so they had a dispute over this. Hafiz ibn Salah was a scholar of hadith, and he was an expert in hadith, and he acknowledged and understood that the hadith that talks about this particular salah, Raghaib, is a fabricated hadith. But he said that, well, I can still practice on it, because although it's so specific that you pray at this time of year, and on this day, on this night, this many rak'ahs, you read this surah each time in each rak'ah, although it's very specific, but it just falls under the general injunction of the Sharia that you should pray. As-salatu nur, salah is nur, you should just pray as much as you can. So that's what Hafiz ibn Salah said. So he said that, for example, if I wanted to just introduce a salah from my own side, I said that every day after dhuhr, I'm going to pray a 4 rakat salah, I'll read Surah Ikhlas 20 times in each rakah. Could I do that if I wanted to do that? If I just decide to do that in my own practice, could I decide to do that? Yeah. So for example, we know from hadith that we're supposed to read Surah Sajda and Surah Mulk every night. If you read that, you get protection in the grave and all that good stuff. So for me, I was finding it very difficult to remember to do that every day, because I would just got caught up in things. Then I said one day that, you know what, in my sunnah after Maghrib, I'll read Surah Sajda every night. In my sunnah after Isha, I'll read Surah Mulk every night. So I started to do that. And then when I started to do that, then I was praying sunnah anyway, so then I would just end up reading it every night. But if I didn't tie it to anything that I was already doing, then I would end up not doing it. So is it permissible for me to do that? I'm appointing that in this salah, I'm reading this particular thing every day. So is that permissible, or am I doing a bid'ah? It's permissible, right? So now Hafiz ibn Salah said the same thing. If I wanted to just pray a salah every night and read Surah Sajda, read Surah Ikhlas, could I do that? Yeah. So then similarly, because there's a general injunction in the Sharia to pray salah, then I can just pray this salah, although I acknowledge the hadith is mawdu'. The hadith is fabricated. But since I can pray any salah, I can just pray this salah as well. So that's what he said. Now, Izzuddin bin Abdus Salam, he said that what you're not considering is that you're a great scholar. Many people, they see what you do and they take that as they understand that to be part of the Sharia. So now you gather the people and you say that on this night of the year, at this time, we're going to read this salah, it has this many rak'ahs, and we're going to read surah, whatever surah you're supposed to read, this many times in each rak'ah. Then what impression will people get, especially if it's coming from a great scholar? That's actually part of deen. So then although you yourself, you're a scholar, you know that the Sharia has a general injunction that you pray, and you can just pray anything you want. Yeah, that's fine. But then that's not a bid'ah haqiqiyah, it's not an actual bid'ah, but it's a relative bid'ah, it's a bid'ah idafiyah. It's a relative bid'ah. Relative in what sense? Not relative to you, but relative to others, other people. Because the impression that you're giving off is that this thing is actually part of deen. Do we understand? So the last thing that we need to consider for today is that even if you've met all the parameters and your thing, you want to introduce something, like introduce a practice for yourself. It falls under 1B, or it falls under 2, fine. But then if you are giving the impression that this thing is necessary, or you just give the impression that this thing is part of deen, then you should still abstain from it. Because although it's not an actual bid'ah, but definitely it could be a relative bid'ah. Okay, so with that, I'm sorry for going over. I thought this would be the shortest discussion. I guess I say that every day, and it ends up getting longer every day. Okay, so how about this? Because there's another session, individual questions, you're more than welcome to see me outside, and I'll just leave the space open. I already took 10 minutes from Mon Usman's time. I apologize to him and everyone who participates in that session. Anyone has any questions, just see me afterwards. If you want to know about specific things, please just see me. And if anybody, okay, just as a disclaimer, this presentation was just for the sake of, for us to get a better understanding of what bid'ah is. Now, if after seeing this, you say, okay, now I'm going to introduce my own actions, please don't do that. Please see me or any of the staff over here, or anyone for that matter, any scholar, and just clarify it beforehand. Okay, because this is just meant to be an introduction. It's not a comprehensive study of bid'ah. This is just one book that I have in bid'ah. This is 300 pages. Okay, so if you want to do anything specific, please just check with a scholar beforehand, and then check before you do that. We ask Allah Ta'ala give us a better understanding. Wa sallallahu ala nabi al-kareem. Jazakumullahu Khairun. I apologize for taking a long time.
So like for those brothers who are just joining us for the weekend, we do have another program in about 5 to 10 minutes, Fiqh of Halal and Haram with Maulana Usman. So please, if you can stretch out. We have a bookstall in the lobby, please visit it. We have a lot of books that are related to the topic that Maulana Yusuf just discussed, and also the book that is used in the next lecture, Fiqh of Halal and Haram.